Okay, then the world will have to wonder. Then the world will have to wonder. But we can repeat a lot of this next week if we need to. The very thought of getting up on a Sunday morning and starting to talk about the question of, okay, who and what is God? This actually sounds like someone else in this room raised questions like that first thing off the bat in the morning. It's pretty intimidating. It's a pretty intimidating thing. It certainly should be. I'd kind of first like to think about what we can and can't know. But let's pray before we start. Father in heaven, thank you for allowing us to be here on this earth. Thank you for creating us. Thank you for giving us life. Thank you for the day that you have created, the universe that you sustain. Thank you that we were able to be here together. Thank you for the safe travel that's broadcasting back to us. Father, please help us to look humbly at your word, to reason carefully, to try to understand more about you. In Jesus' name, amen. One of my favorite Bible verses that I committed to memory when my children became old enough to talk. Deuteronomy 29:29. The secret things belong to God. That is a really good fallback when you just don't know the answer, or when they ask something that there may not be an answer to that. The secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things that are revealed, the second half of that verse, is something that, people kind of key in on the first half, but the second half is equally important. But the things that are revealed belong to us and to our children forever, that we may do all the words of the law. Now, originally, of course, that verse comes to mind for me with my children when they would ask questions, metaphysical questions, there's just no way to answer and say that, well, God knows that. There's some things we don't know. But it also raises a good point about what we are able to know about God. And I'm finding myself repeating things that I know I've heard Kevin say. Can we know everything? No. I could almost do it in your voice. I could almost say it in your voice. Can we know everything? No. Do we know nothing? No. Can we know some things? Yeah, we can know some things. I have a dangerous sort of analogy here. How about my wife? Do I understand everything about Leah? No. I've known her since we were 18. There are still things that blindside me at times. There are things I don't understand. There are things that I've encountered before that I know I don't understand, and just accept that this is how this is. And then there are still new things that I find out I don't know. Does that mean I don't know anything about how she thinks? Well, I hope in almost the bigger part of my entire life, actually, that I've known her most of my life now. I hope I know something. So just because there are some questions I can't answer doesn't mean I haven't learned something. And extending that to our knowledge of God, just because there are questions that I can't answer doesn't mean I don't know anything about God. But there again, and we need to talk about the analogy problem, making analogies and talking about God. One of the sources that I looked at in getting ready for this was Augustine. I heard someone who insisted on saying Augustine. Okay, but everyone else will know what I'm talking about. Augustine on the Trinity. This is not, let me face the camera carefully, this is not a blanket endorsement of everything that Augustine says in his book on the Trinity or anything else that he says anywhere else. He says some things I don't agree with, but he was coming at the end of a period of time in the 4th century, late 4th century, coming at an end of a period of time when there had been a lot of controversy across the Christian world about the nature of God, the nature of the Trinity. There was the various heresies that they had been fighting through, like the Arians, not it's A-R-I-A-N, not the white supremacists, but the followers of Arius who believed that Jesus was a created being that came to represent God, that Jesus was not actually eternal himself. So across the Christian world in the 2nd century and the 3rd century and into the 4th century, there had been these controversies going on about what is really the nature of God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit. And Augustine's coming at the end of a period of time when that had really been argued through. He also had started out in a weird heresy group himself and had taught himself out of it into a more mainstream view. So he, as people often do who have had to work through their own error and get out of their own errors, he had perspective on some things about this that I think was really valuable. And he pointed out 3 fallacies or dangers in how we try to understand God. Very first chapter, he said, first of all is the problem of comparing God to the material world. When I say material world, I mean anything you could put in a science book, right? Energy, matter, space, time. Is there anything else on that? Lots of really smart people there trying to compare God to things in the material world. Excuse me. There are dangers in that because God created the material world, but God was there before the material world. He is greater than anything in his creation. So there are things in his creation that you can understand from him. You can understand things about God from the material world, but it's never going to be a perfect comparison. You could understand certain things about me if I gave you everything that I've ever written in my life and you read that, you would understand certain things about me. There'd be certain things you'd never understand from that because they're things I would never put in writing. Or maybe a better example, you can learn certain things about people from the art that they create. There's a Star Wars analogy here with Admiral Thrawn, but no, nobody's picking up on that. Okay. Studying art to understand a culture and how they think, but that's always imperfect because that's not really the person. That's something they've created. It's an aspect. It tells you something, but it's never going to be perfect. Another fallacy that Augustine warns about is comparing to the human mind or human spirit. And that's what I did in talking about Leah, saying that, well, my understanding of God is like my understanding of this person in some way. And I think the analogy I made is true if you don't take it any further than that really understanding the motivations, the thoughts of another person, we have some knowledge but not perfect knowledge even of each other. Therefore, is our understanding of God similar to that? Yeah. But there again, the human spirit is something closer to who and what God is than the material world. There's will, there's thought, there's feeling in the human spirit, but we are also creation. So in a sense, we're not that far. Well, we are, and then again, we're not. We are far below God. So to say that we could understand God, and there again, the Bible speaks of the Father and the Son. I can understand certain things about that by comparing that to myself and my son William, but we know it's also completely different too, especially in the sense that the that the Father and the Son are one in their will and understanding. You know, there's definitely some limits there. I have no idea what's going on in his head sometimes. That was never true of the Father and the Son in the Godhead. That was never true. And then Augustine also, you think, well, what else do we have? Augustine says the third thing people do wrong is to try to speculate beyond these first two things. So, it really sounds kind of hopeless in a way, but he knew very well, because he was mixed up in it was kind of like Gnosticism. It was the Manichaean heresy. I don't remember exactly what that is, but they got into these ideas of these various emanations upon emanations, that various degrees between spirit and matter, and it almost sounds a little bit like Buddhism or something Eastern. And they had speculated themselves into some ridiculous points. And Augustine warned too that we can also run into trouble when we try to leap beyond the material world, the human mind and spirit, things that we can know firsthand on our own. So, what do we do? I just bring that up because I bring those two things up because it's an important warning, I think, to remember that it's real easy to get into a question that we don't have an answer for, and that's okay. Kevin?
Sort of along those lines, I don't know who first said it, but it goes something to the effect of, the Trinity. Try to understand it, and you'll lose your mind. Try to deny it, and you'll lose your soul. So two sides of that.
Yeah. I read a quote from Charles Spurgeon, great old English Baptist preacher from the 1800s or so. Hugely, he was as well known as Billy Graham today. He was the big preacher in London. And he said that trying to understand the Trinity perfectly is like staring at the sun. Trying to figure out what color the sun is by staring at it. And that you'll never completely make up your mind, and you'll go blind eventually. And so I'm not sure. There's an analogy, again. There's an analogy to material world, so don't really know. I think where that leaves us is we need to look real carefully at what the Bible says, at what's revealed to us, and be sure we know that, and be really cautious about trying to say anything further than what we can definitely show from Scripture. And if there are some things that are hard to figure, well, what do you expect? What do you expect? I'm probably worn this analogy out, but sometimes my cats watch the television. Now, if the cats look at the television and they see, say they see a news program, what do they see? What do they hear? They hear people talking. And they see faces and figures and things. And if I could talk to the cats, and I used to try to talk to cats when I was little, tried to do the Vulcan mind melt with the cat and see if I could get through to them. If I could talk to the cat and ask him, what do you see? Well, I see people, maybe, I see people, and they're talking to each other. If I had to explain to the cat, now the person on the right is in Washington, D.C., and the person on the left is in New York City, that means nothing. And they're talking about the president. Cat, what do you think about the president? Well, there's no frame of reference. There's no frame of reference to even begin to understand that. Somewhere in this room, there may be an ant crawling around. I didn't see one, but I imagine there could be an ant crawling around in here. That ant has no idea what we're talking about this morning. Some things about God, I think I might be about like that ant. And there are just some things because God, I don't even really understand the things that I do know about God. What does it mean to be eternal? What is eternity? Yeah, I can make a technical definition of that, but I don't really have any concept of it because I've never existed from forever to forever. I can, we can put the little thing down there that represents infinity. But what is that actually? Like I asked you the other night, Kevin, why can't we divide by 0? Why not? Just explain to me why you can't. There may be a way.
Our airplanes crash when we do.
Well, yeah, that's from a perfectly practical standpoint. So we want to try to understand God in the ways that he's revealed himself and be fairly cautious about how much further we try to take it and not be dogmatic about anything that isn't specifically revealed and understandable from Scripture. Absolutely. Just an example, and I should have brought this up already, about the understanding God on the basis of the material world. Psalm 18 and 31 says that God is a rock. How is God a rock? Of course, this is poetry, so you get some slack in poetry. How is God like a rock? What does the psalmist mean there?
Immovable, unchangeable.
Yeah. Not just a rock you pick up out of the gravel in the parking lot. This is talking about a mountain, bedrock, the kind of thing you sink your foundation into, the kind of thing you build on. Jeremiah 2:13 says God is a fountain of living waters. How's God like a fountain of fresh water? It's not immovable. Fountain of fresh water is always moving. In fact, that's kind of the point, is that it's not water that's just still, it's water that's always moving, it's always new. Is that a contradiction to say God is both of those things? Well, no. I mean, if you can't deal with a simple paradox, you shouldn't be reading the Bible, right? That's Johnny Ramsey used to say that the paradox is the truth standing on its head to get your attention. And the Bible uses that a lot. Both those things are true of God. Both those things represent the eternal nature of God. That on the one hand, he is immovable. He just is what he is. And on the other hand, he is always new. God doesn't ever get old. And his ability to work in our lives is always new. God is always right here in the present. So even the analogies that the Bible uses, you want to take, it's kind of like from parables, you want to take the point that the parable's trying to make and not draw other things out of it that aren't really the point of it. We can run into problems with that. Say, if you took the parable of the Good Samaritan and said, well, what that parable teaches is that you shouldn't go out on a dangerous road by yourself. That's not what it's about. That may be true, but that's not what the point is. So you want to get the point that the analogy is making and not try to take it any further. So looking at the things that at the ways God has revealed himself, Let's look at Romans chapter 1, verse 20. And this is the text on the natural revelation. What do we learn about God? What do we learn about God from the creation? Romans 1:20, 19's better. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. So the natural revelation is part of God's revelation of himself. And in looking at Augustine's cautions about taking analogies too far, I don't mean, and Augustine didn't mean that the natural world he didn't mean it doesn't reveal things about God. It's just, it only reveals so much. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power, his divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made. So according to Scripture, you can understand certain things about God just by looking around you, if you have your eyes open. His eternal power, his divine nature, power and eternity. What other things could you get from the natural world? Just what could you learn about God from the creation he's made?
Order, design, brilliant mind to
Yeah.
somehow create and organize chaos and stuff.
Order. Yes, order. And a beautiful order. There's both. there's both. I mean, I find the beauty in order too, and some of us come at things from the hard science side, the engineer, and I come at it from the standpoint of the humanities, and we see the same things. We see the beauty of the order in it. So there is that as well from the natural creation. I've always thought it was kind of interesting. So you read this and think, well, what does this look like then? A people who didn't have contact with God's Word in the ancient world and got the message. What does that look like? And I don't know, but only God will be the judge of that, but looking at some of the beliefs of Native Americans, I see some things, it seems like they got the message. The Caddo Indians lived around here and up and down the southern Great Plains, speak of the Caddo Aya, is the translation is the chief spirit. Now that's kind of taking a human analogy that, okay, we have the chief of our tribe, but and they believed in spirits in different things, in the river and the wind and various kinds of other invisible beings. But they looked at the world around them and saw, but somebody's got to be keeping this all. Somebody made this all. Somebody's in charge. There's a chief of the spirits. There's a chief spirit. And living out on the plains, they figured, must be up in the sky, because that's the biggest thing we can see. So people could get the basic idea. There's a God. He created a world. He created a world with order and beauty, and there's a right and wrong for us to follow, and there's an understanding there. But to know the things that we really need to know, have to have special revelation, or we'd go way, way wrong. So as we start that, I also kind of think of what Job says a couple of different times, but especially in chapter 40. He says, I'm put my hand over my mouth now. When we start thinking about the nature of God, I want to explore that. I want to understand. God made us curious, but when we get to the place that we're speculating, that we don't really know, I hope that I will put hand over my mouth and stop when I get to the point that this I know, this is what I know, and this is what I don't. Does that make sense? Any questions so far on that? Tyler Young did a great series on the nature of God. That was a while ago. And I'm kind of partly basing the next section of this on that, and partly on Roy Lanier's book, The Timeless Trinity, which I guess I'm a little biased because he was one of my dad's. Roy Lanier was one of the giants that I heard about growing up. One of the grand old men that my dad studied under. Roy Lanier Sr. Junior's good too. But he wrote a very good book on the Trinity. One of the few that our brethren have done of that, to that extent. First off, we could look at 1 Timothy 1 and 17. My handwriting's gotten weirder and weirder and weirder. I love the doxologies, the times when Paul just jumps out and bursts into praise for a minute. It's beautiful poetry, and at the same time really delivers a doctrinal punch, which is interesting. 1 Timothy 1 and 17, to the King, eternal, immortal, invisible, to God who alone is wise, be honor and glory forever and ever. Amen. Somebody ought to write a song about that. So we learn from this that God is eternal and immortal. The eternity of God. We learn that he is the only wise. Not that there aren't other people who are wise in the entire history of the planet, but God is alone wise when you look at the scale. There's nobody else worth mentioning when you talk about God's wisdom. And that brings us to some of the words we commonly think about: omniscient, all-knowing, the eternal nature of God. Don't think there's an omni word, is there? Caston may know, if anybody will know a word, I think. The self-existent nature of God. That's a strange word, self-existent. He just is. I'm not self-existent. I mean, there was a point in time when I didn't exist. There was a sequence, chain of events that came together, or I wouldn't have been here. Well, it came pretty close, too, a couple of times. There's a letter that got lost between my mom and dad when they were courting, and various things like that. That the whole family might not have ever happened if she hadn't written back to him with a Valentine card that basically said, if I'm paraphrasing, I hope they don't watch this. While he was in the service over in Germany, hadn't heard from him, and finally sent a card back saying, look, are we on or off? Courting by mail. It was an interesting thing. So, that could have, they had most of their courtship by mail. And, I easily might have just not been here. We understand that kind of thing. That there is a point in time, and I can point to the people that I have that are responsible for my existence. And God just is. Think about what God told Moses when he revealed his name. I am. Well, if you weren't just completely terrified at that, you might think in the back of your mind, if you're Moses, I am what? What does God say? I am that I am. That's spooky. That's strange, you know. That's strange. To God, he just is. We think in terms of I was doing this and I will be that and I'm here right now. But to God, he just is. There's no, the past and present and future don't seem to make the same difference to him. When Jesus in his argument with the Pharisees said, before Abraham was, I am. That wasn't a slip in grammar there. And they understood it because they were ready to stone him. They knew what he was saying. God just is. That's one of those things that I don't think our brains can deal with. I don't think our brains can understand that, at least not in this life, to even begin to understand. We know that God is spirit. John 4:24, Jesus tells the Samaritan woman that God is spirit. What is spirit? What is that? I can tell you what it's not. It's not matter, energy, space, time. It's not any of those things. I don't know if this is on purpose or not, but I've heard, I'm sure you have too, heard pointed out that the first verse of the first book of the Bible contains references to matter and energy and space and time. In the beginning, there's time. God created, that's action, actually. God created energy, the heavens and the earth, space and matter. As though God is saying, now that we've got everything you understand out of the way, let me tell you let me tell you the rest. Let me tell you what's going on. I don't know if that's intentional or not. It's true, whether it's intentional or not. What is spirit? I don't know. I have a soul, the Bible tells me. I think I kind of get that instinctively. Because if I don't have a spirit, then what am I? Am I what materialist science says? Am I just a bunch of electrons firing right now, causing me to say stuff? Just a bunch of electrons running through some sort of computer? Is that all I am? I don't think so. I reject that. Instinctively. You know what I mean? I just instinctively reject that. Why do I? Why do I reject that? Yeah, because I think I'm more than that. I think you're more than that. I think people are more than that. If someone really wanted to press me on why, I'd have to say, because they are. You know? Hey, I can say that too, you know. You don't have to understand that. That may just be kind of like, why do we think things are right or wrong? Is there some basic sense that something's right, something's wrong? Did God put something in us that made us understand? So, spirit, whatever that is, God is that in the ultimate sense. The omniscient and all-powerful nature. There's Isaiah chapter 46. It's wonderful chapters anyway, but Isaiah chapter 46 has some pretty thought-provoking things. Isaiah 46 and verse 9 through 10. Remember the former things of old, for I am God and there is no other. I am God and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times things not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will accomplish all my purpose. Well, from that, we have the omniscient nature. He knows the end from the beginning. He is all-powerful. He says, my counsel shall stand. I will accomplish all my purpose. This is one of the big problems, just totally off the subject a little bit, but one of the big problems with the premillennial view that Jesus came to establish his earthly kingdom and then couldn't for some reason because people weren't ready, and so set up the church, and then he'll come back and try again. God has never had to try anything again, has he? Does God ever have to have a plan B? What God decides to do, he will do. If Jesus meant to set up an earthly kingdom when he came the first time, it would be there. And if God had decided to do things that way, that'd be great with me. I'd be glad to go there. But that's not what he did. And it wasn't because he couldn't have. When God decides he's going to do something, he will do it. Whatever is in accordance with his nature, he will, and that he can do. And what he decides to do, he will do. There's also, obviously, intelligence, self-awareness, which ought to be pretty obvious already from these verses, but the fact that he has counsel, he accomplishes his purpose. That may be obvious to us, but there are views in the world of God as a sort of force that surrounds us, penetrates us, binds us together. Am I getting the quote right? Yeah, I can't ever remember that. Like the Force in Star Wars, a sort of mindless energy field that seems to be extremely dangerous because people are able to use it for either really good or really bad. No, not God. Not God. He is intelligent. It's not like the Buddhist view either, which I think was George Lucas was drawing from for Star Wars, that there's just sort of a mindless whatever that you aim to be absorbed into this nirvana of mindless harmony with something. God's not just a something. He's a person. He's a he. He has thought. He takes action. He says, I will accomplish something. He has thought and action. Now, all those things are kind of in the category of what God's essence is, of what he is and what kind of being he is in terms of not really, doesn't really tell you what he's like as a person, as far as character. There's much more we can say about that, of course, when we think about character of God. Hebrews 1:6 says that it is impossible for God to lie. That's 6:18. Wow. I just looked at 6:18 and then flipped it around and dropped a number and made 1:6. That's how I am with numbers. That's how numbers are with me. God cannot lie. So he is truthful. Does that mean God is not all-powerful? If he's all-powerful, why can't he tell a lie? I think we're probably asking the wrong question there. Would being able to tell a lie add to his power? No. That would be lessening who he is. He is truthful, so that's not changing who he is. Say there's some things that God can't do. Yeah, he can't tell a lie. I can do that. I can do things that are cheap and petty, and he doesn't do those things either. He can't do those things. He can't be less than he is, or he wouldn't be all-powerful. We could talk about that rock too heavy to lift too if you want to, but I think I've got the answer on that one. Can God make a rock so heavy he can't lift it? Well, no, because you're talking about something that would be self-contradictory to exist in the first place. If God has infinite power to lift it, he'd have to have more than infinite power to make a rock that was too heavy. How more than infinite power doesn't, that's nonsense, right? I could also say that God's got better things to do than foolishness like that anyway. So I think that's probably asking the wrong question. God is faithful. Psalm 119 and verse 90. His faithfulness is to all generations. One of the big points of emphasis in the Psalms, God's steadfast love, his faithfulness. First John 4:8. God is love. That's one of the most direct statements, I guess, in the entire Bible about God is this. Besides God saying, I am, if there is an answer to I am what, that's one of the most direct statements. God is love. That's stated so simply and powerfully that there's sure got to be some emphasis on that. And God is holy. Habakkuk 1 and 3. God is too holy to look upon sin. 1:13. You don't want me to do your taxes, to tell you that. Holiness, of course, we think of holiness in terms of purity. Holiness as it's presented throughout the Old Testament also has to do with being set apart, being set apart, being special. God is set apart in every way too. There is no other like him. There's not anything else that you could look at and say, well, yeah, God's kind of like this person over here too. You know, no, not really. Not really at all. And too far down on the board. Well, Revelation 19 says that, Revelation 19 verse 2, his judgments are true and just. He is just. And then James 1:17, which probably ought to go up here actually. There is no variation or shadow of turning. He does not change. That doesn't mean he doesn't change the things that he does or how he operates, obviously, right? He spoke through the prophets in former times, and then he revealed himself through his Son, so he changes his means, but he doesn't change in who he is. He didn't have to grow up. Well, thanks for coming. That brings us up to the end of a section anyway.